All right, hello, welcome to this channel, welcome to this video. My name is Tyler Kusunoki. I am an admissions strategist for Japan, and I oversee a lot of different students from Tokyo, helping them get to their goals in terms of US university. And I really want to start by talking a little bit more about the admissions process, because I think that it's helpful, especially as things change all the time, that everyone has a clear understanding of what it actually takes to get into university, what it actually takes to have a competitive application. And then from that, if we know what those are, then we can start building in more specific strategies. So for these first few videos, most of the focus is really going to be on what does it take to get into university, what are the baseline requirements, and then what are the challenges that are expected from those, and then how we can go into it. So one of the first things to get started with is just how difficult it is now to get into US university. So in this past cycle, for most of the top schools, the acceptance rate was around 3 to 9%, anywhere from 3 to 9%. And the number of applicants is increasing all the time. For NYU, it was over 100,000, UCLA over 100,000, Princeton was 60,000, Harvard was 50,000 applicants. And from those 50,000 applicants, 2,000 students got in, right? And I think that is a very important kind of starting point to frame all of this, right? When I talk with admissions officers, especially at the highest schools like Princeton and Harvard and Stanford, they often talk about how it's not just are you good enough, but are you the right fit? And to make this sort of clear, just to give you an example, let's say it's Princeton and Princeton has 60,000 applicants, right? From those 60,000 applicants, the admissions officers that I have talked to will say, oh, from those 60,000 applicants, probably around 35,000 will be good enough to get into Princeton in terms of their grades, in terms of all of their application, they will be good enough to get in to Princeton. From those 35 to 40,000, around 15,000 or so will be so amazing that they probably would have gotten into any top university, right? So there are 15,000, 25% of that 60,000, 15,000 kids are so amazing that they would get into any top school anywhere in the US. From that 15,000, Princeton is going to select 2,000, right? Which means there are 13,000, if we just do some rough math, there are 13,000 students who are so good they would get into any top university in America, and they are not getting into Princeton, okay? Because Princeton has certain decisions that they need to make around priorities. Do we need these types of students? Do we need this balance? Are you the right fit for us? Because you may be academically ready, but you may not have the extracurriculars or the leadership that are going to show things off, right? All of these different components are part of what gets you into these top schools. And even if you are good enough, the reality in the US, what makes it different from a country like Japan, what makes it different from a lot of other countries where admissions is focused primarily just on grades, is that these very top universities, a lot of the competition is also around fit. It's not just about are you a match for our school in terms of your academics, but are you a fit for a school in terms of the type of student you are, the type of student that we need on our campus, and how are we going to build a class of 2,000 students that has everything that we want from this group of 15,000 amazing students, from this larger group of 35,000 great students, from this total applicant pool of 60,000. And so applying to get in to the US is tough. And that has trickled down, right? Because all of those students who did not get into Princeton, who did not get into Stanford, who did not get into Yale or Harvard, they're applying to schools that are a little bit further down the list. They are applying to your NYU, they are applying to your UCLA, they are applying to your Carnegie Mellon, and then they will take up those spots and push it all the way down. So the competition is very important to make clear at the very beginning in order to make all of this other strategy make sense. And so that is kind of what I want to start with, is that the reality now is that the US application process is more competitive than ever. US education is more expensive than ever. And so as a result of all of those different things, making sure that you are starting your college application process or continuing your college application process with the right knowledge, with the right strategy, with the right support is all incredibly important. And so that's kind of what I wanted to start with for these first few videos, is really emphasizing what is important, what is not important, and how can you make the most of the things that you want? How can you make the most of the resources that you have to make sure you are doing the best you can to be one of those 2,000 students that Princeton says yes to be one of those 1,500 students that MIT says yes to, or wherever your school aim is, right? I think that it's important to understand the challenge so that you can build the strategy. And that is always how I advise when I talk with students. It's always about, do you have a plan for what is next? And if you have a plan for what is next, then you will be able to tackle everything with a lot more confidence. You will be able to make better decisions and you will improve your chances of getting in. Okay. So that is the big overall preamble, right? It's tough. It's hard. It's very competitive. Even the very best do not get in. And therefore, then, given that that is the reality, how can you do your best, right? And not just throw your hands and give up and be like, oh, well, if that's the case, then why should I even bother? We want you to bother. We want you to try. And so if the goal is to try, what do you need to know in order to try the most effectively? And that is what this video series is going to be all about, is let me give you the knowledge to know so that you can try the best, okay? And so let's start off today by really just talking about some of the key components, and we'll talk about a couple of them. So when you look at a college application for the US, the college application is built up of a couple different pieces. It is built up of your grades, right? It is evaluated on not just your grades, but your course difficulty, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It is going to be evaluated on your test scores. More and more schools now are going back to requiring an SAT or an ACT, right? They will take a look at your extracurricular activities. They will take a look at your recommendation letters, right? And then, of course, they will take a look at your essays as well, right? And so these are kind of all the different components. And then on top of that, for many families, I know part of the challenge now is going to be financing and affording college. And I will talk a little bit about that, how that can influence college decision-making as well a little bit later. But the focus today is going to be on those first two components, your academics and your test scores, because those things are very closely related. All right. So first of all, your courses. Academics are the most important thing that colleges are going to be looking at. It is very important for you to remember that at the end of the day, regardless of the perception of what a college may be, the first thing that they are is they are academic institutions, which means the first thing that they are going to be assessing for is, can this student succeed in our classrooms? Okay, there are two main things that a college needs to be able to say about a student before even deciding whether or not they should evaluate them for acceptance. The first statement is, can this student succeed in our classrooms? The second statement is, can this student succeed in our culture, in our community? Okay, but the first question, first and foremost, will always be, can this student succeed in our classrooms? And that is true at any university. And so that is why they are at first going to evaluate your academics. So your GPA across 4 years, right? What are your grades? What classes did you take? And this becomes very important, especially for students who have the opportunity to select their courses. Not every student has the opportunity to choose what classes they take regardless, but most students by the time they get to high school will have an opportunity to choose a path, right? If you're in sort of an international school, you may be choosing which APs you take or which IBs you take. If you are in a school that offers different tracks, right? At a Japanese school, are you choosing the international course? Are you choosing the local course, right? What are the pathways that you have available to you? And what decisions can you make in order to improve your chances of getting in? So first of all is difficulty, right? While a school will always care about your grades, they care very much about how difficult the classes you took are as well, okay? Because if they did not, everyone would just take the easiest classes, get a 4.0 GPA, and apply to college and get in. Colleges also weigh the rigor of your classes. And so it is important to always be thinking about, how can I maximize that? How can I show the school that I am challenging myself academically by taking the hardest possible classes? So if you are starting your high school out, it's important to know your school's full curriculum, right? Especially in things that offer a lot of advancement, like math. Math is often one of those classes where there's a lot of possibility to advance and move faster. So if you are a freshman right now, or you even a sophomore right now, have you looked ahead to what is the highest level of math class that I can be taking? And if I want to be taking that in my final year, my senior year, what classes do I need to take ahead of that in order to get there? Right? So then you are planning and figuring out a way to take the hardest possible courses, because what a college wants to see is that you are pushing the limits of what you are doing in school, right? We often get these questions of, oh, should I take APs outside of class? Should I do all this self-study stuff outside? Yes, but not if it's going to cause your in-school grades to struggle, right? Your priority, first and foremost, the thing that colleges are going to look at first and foremost, because that is the most fair thing to do, is where is your school? What is your school's curriculum? What are the most difficult classes that school offers? Are you taking them? What grade did you get? In that order, right? Where is your school? What classes are offered? What are the hardest? Did you take them? How did you do? Okay. And that is the goal, right? Is to try to take the hardest classes, because the other question that we get is it better to take a hard course and get a B, or an easy course and get an A? And my answer to that has always been consistent, is that the answer is take the hard course and get an A, right? If the choice is between hard course and B or easy course and A, the answer is hard course and A, right? Is that because that's what your goal should be. The goal should not be take hard course and get a B. The goal should take hard course and get an A. But I will still recommend taking the harder course in most cases, right? There will always be situations where we'll recommend something different. But by and large, you should always be looking to take the harder course because the ceiling is higher, right? You can always get tutoring, you can always get more studying in, you can always get greater support to try to get that A, because a lot of colleges will internally recalculate your GPA based on the difficulty of the courses you take. That is the only way that they can reward course difficulty, is if they re-weight your GPA accordingly, right? The UC system says this very openly, right? That up to 8 of your classes, if they are an HLIB or they're an AP or they're an honors, up to 8 of your classes will get a full 1 point bump, right? So if you got a B, which is a 3.0, it will be weighted as a 4.0, right? And that is just a reward for taking your harder classes. And so in almost every circumstance, it is important to look at the course difficulty that is ahead of you, try to find the ways to take the harder courses, and then make sure that you do well in them. So that is kind of how we think about academics, is that within school is the number one priority. Now, once you know that you are taking the hardest classes in your school and you are doing well in those things, right? Now you can start to consider the other options and the other ways to show that you can very much answer the question of, does this student fit in our classrooms? With a huge yes, I absolutely do. Okay. And that's where self-studying your APs, right? Where you can study your APs outside and then do that, where dual enrollment and taking college classes at a nearby community college, all of those things can be valuable, but only if you have that starting foundation of your tests, your studies. So that is one of the first pieces of advice, is know your curriculum, know it well, identify the hardest possible path, consider whether or not you can take it, do well, right? And then build the resources, build the support that you need to get there upon that decision, okay? And so that is the most important thing, because that is the first thing that colleges are going to be looking at to decide, do I even look at the rest of your stuff, right? Or are you just baseline, it's not going to work for you, right? So that would be my first piece there. And built into that, right, is standardized testing. Right? This idea of SAT, ACT, and for a lot of our international students, the TOEFL as well, right? The TOEFL or the IELTS. Most schools are going back, most of the top schools are going back to being test required. So you must submit your test scores. So taking the SAT, taking the ACT is going to increasingly be something that you must consider as part of your overall strategy. And my general advice for this is that by the end of 10th grade, right? And so by the end of, if you're in a Japanese school, by the end of high school year 1, right, you should have covered all of the math that is going to be on the SAT. So the SAT goes up to Algebra 2 in terms of math difficulty. Same thing for the ACT. So by the time you get up to finish grade 10, you should have completed that level of math. And if you're doing it earlier, amazing, right? But basically the year that you finish Algebra 2 is the year you should start really thinking about the SAT, because you will have all the knowledge you need to succeed on that test. And so at the end of 10th grade, usually I will recommend taking a mock test, right? First of all, to figure out which test is better for you. Do I take the SAT? Do I take the ACT? If you are in Japan, the SAT has more testing centers. It will probably be easier to secure. And even then, it's hard to get a spot, right? It's very competitive to get those spots. But the SAT is probably going to be the better option over the ACT, just because there are more testing centers available. But if you feel like the ACT is a strong fit for you, then you should, of course, take the ACT. So I always recommend students to try both, figure out which test they're more comfortable with, and then pursue that as their major focus. Don't keep trying to study both, right? Pick one and commit to it, and then go. And once you do that, right, you then have a plan that you can set up, right? That by the end of 10th grade, I know my starting score, I know what I'm working towards, then the best thing to do is to use that summer between 10th grade and 11th grade to really focus on your SAT and try to get a good score, right? Aim for taking the August test if your score on your mock is good and you feel comfortable with the SAT, and really move towards that. Because then you get the SAT done, you get it out of the way, you don't need to spend any more time on it, right? I usually recommend students do that, and at most, try to take it at about 3 times, and that's it. Not because colleges care how many times you take the test, right? Some schools will see it, but my reasoning for taking it only 3 times is not that. It's more that it's about time, right? As you get to your 11th and your 12th grade, the greatest limitation that you're going to have is time. You have your essays, you have your grades, you have your extracurricular projects, you have all these things that you are going to want to do. And if you are spending hours of your time focusing on a test to improve that score from 1450 to 1470, there are so many other things that you can be doing that are going to better help your chances of getting in. Okay? And that is true even for schools that are testing required. All right. So usually I limit students to taking it 3 times, not because I care that colleges will know if they've taken it 5 or 6 times, but if they're taking it 5 or 6 times, that means they're spending over a year and a half, for some students, even 2 years, like 300 to 400 hours studying a test, right? When even 100 of those hours spent on other parts of their application would have given them a bigger boost, right, than 100 hours spent on improving your score by 20 points. So that is my overall guidance on the test prep, is that it is important. Start thinking about it after you take with the equivalent of 10th grade math, whenever you are taking 10th grade math, right? And really limit the amount of times you are taking the test to really focus on getting a good score, getting it quickly, so that you can use the rest of your time to focus on everything else that will be important for your application, okay? And then for TOEFL, you have to do it, right? Whereas a lot of schools are test optional, TOEFL is a must, right? And so you must be aiming to hit around 90 to 100 as a minimum, right? So if your aim is US universities, you need to start preparing for that TOEFL quickly, right? You can take it as many times as you need to, but remember that the TOEFL will expire after 2 years. So your genuine, serious attempts need to come in the last 2 years of high school. So just keep that in mind as well, okay? So that was kind of my first thing around the pieces that are going to be the most important for the initial glance. When we look at how do we find schools that are initial match for me, the things that you were looking at are GPA and test score. Those are the numbers that are going to be part of your application, right? We will look at the stories that are part of your application in the next video, but today it's really, how do I show that I will be a good, successful student in the school's classrooms? And that's what these will do, is classes, class difficulty, doing well in those classes, and then getting good test scores. All right. Talk to you soon. Thanks.